Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is George Mason, and along with my partner, Nancy Caston, Rabbi Nancy Caston, we are Faith Commons, an organization that is interfaith in nature, and we try to bring people together for the common good, among which are events like this. Thank you for, many of you are great supporters and friends of Faith Commons, and we're delighted to have this conversation tonight, and we invite you to be a participant in it. I should start by thanking the pastor of this church, Versola Law, who is sitting there, and she and her staff have allowed us to use their facility tonight and welcomed us as they always do, because they are about unity. The whole nature of this tradition is about bringing people together. Versola, you'll be happy to know that I know just this much about your tradition so that I could answer questions. People said, well, what denomination is this? And I said, well, sort of not, but the Christian Church Disciples of Christ has been from the beginning a kind of church unity movement, restoring the idea of the New Testament church as a spiritual community and not broken up into divisive denominations and the like. And so they have continued that tradition here at Northway, and we're grateful for it in our community very, very much. Thank you. Just a few logistical things before we get started, and I think you probably all can find a restroom if you need it in the back and know that you can get up at any time and that sort of thing. But you should have, I hope, gotten an index card when you came in, perhaps a pen, and if you haven't, raise your hand. Nancy will find you and give you one. So the way this is going to work is we're going to have an opportunity to hear from our guests for a little while. And during the time that they're speaking, something might click in your head and you would really like to know the answer to this question or ask it. And Nancy's going to roam about, and you can raise a card and she'll get it. And then she's going to collate these and decide if yours is a worthy one. Or rephrase it in some way, but in any case, we might not be able to get to every question is what I really mean. And so she'll then help ask them questions to respond. But again, thank you for being here, and we would like this to be a great exchange of ideas and conversation. The first part of the program, of course, is a presentation, and at this point, it's important for me to introduce our good friends to you, whom we have come to know in just really even just today and yesterday, but we have been affiliated with and knowledgeable about the organization they serve for quite a long time. The Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue in Jerusalem has been a tremendous agent of peacebuilding in Israel and Palestine, and they both work for them, and Hana has worked for them for more than 20 years and John just 5, but it's important for me to say that they work together very well. This is Hana Bendcowsky, and she is the program director for the Rossing Center, and this is John Munayer, and he is the director of the international engagement for Rossing. John is a Palestinian Christian and an Israeli as well, an Israeli citizen from East Jerusalem, and Hana is an Israeli Jew. And so they live and work together in this process of Jewish and Christian relations, working on that together and in their own lives and families, and of course helping others do so as well. So you see the theme for the evening, Jewish-Christian relations, but particularly we want to say, how has that been since October 7th and the Gaza war? And we should at least pause at this moment to say that we give thanks for some relief and hope and promise that has happened because of the release of the hostages, because of the promise of Palestinian prisoners being released and the hope of peace and a peace agreement that will change the Middle East. It's been a long time, it's been painful, and there is reason for hope and reason for worry about that, of course, but we are eager to hear from those who are living on the ground in this way and are working to that end. So thank you so much, John and Hana, for being with us, and we'll let you lead us, and then we'll pepper you with questions afterward.
So good evening, and thank you very much for joining us this evening, and thank you very much for the hospitality. We'll introduce ourselves, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the Rossing Center and what we do and who we are, and then focus on Jewish-Christian relations in the Holy Land and how do we heal or recover and rebuilding the relationship after, well, since the 7th of October and the war in Gaza. We're going to talk about the reality that we experience in the Holy Land, but of course we're going to reflect on other contexts as well. But I will start by telling you my personal story and how I got to be involved in dialogue in the Rossing Center. I just wonder if the microphones are really necessary, because I hear, yeah, it is, okay. Okay, because it sounds strange on my end. So I grew up in a modern Orthodox Jewish family. That means observant Jewish family, but of course quite open-minded. But I knew nothing about other religions, because in Israel, in the education system, we tend to learn only about our own faith. So I went to Hebrew school, so we got a lot of Jewish education, but really nothing about other religions. And when I got to university and I wanted to study history, I had to take an introductory course in Christianity, because you cannot really learn European history if you don't know anything about Christianity. But my knowledge was typical Israeli knowledge, something about Christmas trees, Santa Claus. And Israelis also think that Halloween and Thanksgiving, these are Christian holidays. But that's about it. So the first time I went to class and started to learn about the New Testament and Christianity, I thought, wow, how can no one have told me about it before? It's so interesting. Because we live in a Western culture, which is very Christian culture: television, music, art, politics. I mean, can you really understand American politics without knowing anything about Christianity and the way they relate to Israel? It's all connected to religion. So I got more involved, and then I realized that if I really want to learn something, I have to leave the campus and move to the city, to the old city, to meet with people, to talk to people, to visit the holy places. And then I discovered the Christians. First, the European Christian, the clergy who serve in the Holy Land, but then I discovered, and I'm talking about discovery because it is information that is not obvious for most of the Israeli Jews, that there are actually local Christians, indigenous Christians, Palestinian Christians. And I found my way into the interfaith world, but in a very, very specific context of the dialogue in the Holy Land with its special, unique reality. And from the Jewish-Christian dialogue into peace building and general Israeli-Palestinian dialogue.
My story is slightly different than Hana's. I'm a Palestinian Christian with Israeli citizenship who went to an Israeli Jewish school. I'll say that again. Palestinian Christian with Israeli citizenship who went to an Israeli Jewish school. So when people ask me, when did your Jewish-Christian dialogue start? It started when I was building Chanukiot for Hanukkah at school, or I remember trying to convince my mother to build a sukkah at home because I thought it was really cool and it was like almost like a camp, a cozy thing. So that's when sort of Jewish-Christian dialogue started for me. But it was also a painful story where in my classroom, I'm a Palestinian Christian. I was the only one in the classroom. And I remember after a history class when me and my Israeli Jewish classmate had a debate on what happened in 1948, or the Nakba, the catastrophe, he sort of turned to me and asked me, are you with us or are you with them? Right? This question really troubled me as I had to go back home and wrestle with that question. And I asked my parents, what was I supposed to say? And I entered into a long journey of trying to learn about the context, but also see myself as a bridge builder. And that's where really I found, let's see if this works. There we go. I found home in the organization that both me and Hana work for, the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue. It's an interreligious organization that promotes peace, justice, and equality. But if you need to remember anything about the Rossing Center, it's that we believe that if peace and justice is taught in schools and universities as seriously as math, we will see a completely different reality in our world, and specifically in Israel-Palestine. But the history of the organization is one that is deeply rooted in Jewish-Christian relations. Because the founder, the late Daniel Rossing, and the Rossing Center is named after the first founder, Daniel Rossing, was specifically tackling Jewish-Christian relations in the Holy Land. Because he saw that the nature of the relationship between Jews and Christians in the West is completely different than the relationship in the Holy Land. Right? Most of the Christians, for instance, in the Holy Land are Eastern Christians, not so much Western Christians. The history of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust is one that is foreign to the Christians in Israel-Palestine. Right? So he saw that also the dynamics of majority-minority, right, are completely flipped. So he saw that there was really a need for this organization. But in 2010, he passed away, and in 2013, our current director, Dr. Sarah Bernstein, took over the organization, and she decided to widen it up to all communities. Well, there we go. But as you can imagine, that's a nice vision to have, but we work in a very, very problematic and difficult context. The populations we work with are deeply, deeply traumatized. For Israelis that have either loved ones who have been killed or kidnapped, or simply saw the footages of October 7th, this was obviously a very traumatizing time. And it also tapped into the collective sort of trauma and identity that many Israeli Jews have experienced, right? And for Palestinians themselves, right? Seeing the bombs and the starvation in Gaza and the complete destruction of the Gaza Strip has deeply traumatized its people. And it's also tapped into our collective trauma of the Nakba, right? So we're working with highly and deeply traumatized people. And this idea of hatred has completely been normalized. It's very, we were speaking earlier about people who go through extreme violence. They usually we try to integrate them back into society, right? People either who have, their relatives have been killed or they themselves have been injured. You know, they get some medical care, they get maybe some welfare support. You slowly try and get them back into society. But what stays normal is the hatred of the person who harmed you. So if that's true for an individual, imagine what happens to societies. And I think we've seen the consequences of that. And this heightens racism and social distance between our communities. It's very common for both Israeli and Palestinian kids from a very early age, probably the age of 3, some research suggests, that they already have sort of concept that they're the enemy and associate them with violence, evil, and so on and so forth. And this is something that we're deeply trying to engage with and change. And the battle for narratives, I mean, this is true also for the US, right? In a context of conflict and deep tensions between communities, there's a battle for narratives, right? If you can convince that your narrative is the right narrative and you're the ultimate victim and the other is only the perpetrator, it's simply going to continue to create us and them mentality, right? And also a zero-sum mentality. So the only way that I can win is if you lose. And if you win, that means that I
just want to add about the circles of trauma. We think that only people who are personally involved in certain incidents, they are the traumatized. But actually the waves of the trauma go far beyond that. So if we just take an example, for example, what's happening in Gaza, the wave of the trauma gets all the way to Christian and Jewish communities abroad, Jews abroad affected by that, Christian abroad affected by that, the relationship affected by that. So it's not just people who personally affected by the incidents are traumatized, but a lot of others who are maybe not aware of how traumatized they are. So we're talking about lots of people who not always can identify this or give a name to this trauma that are impacted by what's happening in a place that could be far away from where you are. And we're going to relate to that also when we talk about Jewish-Christian relation post the 7th of October.
And these are some of the troubling statistics at the moment in the communities that we're trying to work with. So again, as I mentioned, we spoke a bit about some of the trauma and the hatred and the separation and segregation that our communities experience. And unfortunately, this has resulted in very dehumanizing statistics. Just to focus on one, for instance, around 76% of Israeli Jews would say that there's no innocent people in Gaza. Right? This is a study done in August 2025 by the Center Accord, which is affiliated with the Hebrew University. Very troubling statistics. Or if I look at the statistic all the way at the bottom, half of the Palestinians said that the October 7th attack was correct. Right? And this was from a study done in May 2025. These are the communities that we're trying to engage with. And as you can see, there's a lot of challenges in doing so. And again, you can look at some of the other statistics, but it's not looking great. So how do we try to tackle this as an organization? We try to do it in three main ways. The first one is we try to completely transform educational institutions. Do you remember I said that whole thing about maths, right? We try to work with the school principals, with the teachers, and then for the schools themselves to bring in peace and justice education. So it's a 3-year program that we work with in schools. Or we work with higher education, with universities, trying to get them to do similar work with university students. The second thing that we do is we use trauma-informed methodologies. As I mentioned, we're highly traumatized. You are probably traumatized from seeing some of the footage back home, our home. So we're using trauma-informed methodologies to tap into some of our most deep pain in order to actually have fruitful conversations in order to build an alternative. And the third thing is we specialize in the intersection between religion and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Our communities tend to be religious. And also the conflict has religious elements to them. And I would say, it's pretty funny that sometimes we engage with our friends who are either Muslim, Jewish, or Christian, and they might completely practice the opposite of what their official religion says, but they're still deeply Muslim, Jewish, or Christian, right? So it's very common to see a Muslim, for instance, drinking alcohol, but he's still a deep Muslim, or an Israeli Jew who's eating pork, or so on and so forth. You get the idea. So this is sort of just in numbers some of our work. We work with around 6,000 participants each year. We try to engage with around 100 to 120 educational institutions, and we produce a lot of content online. Because a lot of the hateful content that we see is people being exposed through their phones. So we're trying to create alternative content for that. This is who we are. We're around 18 staff members. Not everyone's full-time, from different areas in the country, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian, those who are very religious and those who are less religious. But we bring people who are sort of striving for the same mission and are experts in the field of education and dialogue.
Okay. Okay, so since this evening we want to focus on Jewish-Christian dialogue and the changes and the challenges after October 7th, I thought to start by just talking about to what extent Christians and Jews actually know each other. So I have I have some data from surveys that we did in the last year. This is from the Jewish survey that we just we haven't published even, so you're the first group to see the data. We asked Israeli Jews in a survey about attitudes of Israeli Jews toward Christian and Christianity, have you ever visited a church? Third, have never visited a church. Now, since Israelis travel around the world, so maybe they live in a city where there are no Christian and there's no church, but almost all the Israelis have been abroad, and most of them visited Christian countries. So they visited a place, they passed nearby a church, and they never entered a church. Some of them, for religious reasons, they avoided entering the church. We ask, do you have any Christian acquaintance? And half of them don't. So where do you meet Christians? Since the Christian community in Israel-Palestine is quite small, you don't have opportunity to meet Christian, to talk to a Christian. So the Christians are an image, either from the television, as I said, Christmas tree, Santa Claus, Halloween, or something from the history book. And we're gonna mention the history and the memory of Jewish-Christian relation and how it impacts the Israeli Jewish society. Sorry, it must be this one. Then we asked in a survey that we did in 2024, December 2024, a survey among Christians, Arab, Palestinian Christians, citizens of Israel, only Arab speakers, so not foreign Christians, just local Christians. One of the questions, and by the way, this article that summarized the survey exists on our website, so if you want to read all of it, you're welcome to do that. In my daily life, I interact with Israeli Jewish population, and over 3/4 said that they have daily or quite often or frequent interaction with Israelis. So most of the Christian Arabs have quite often interaction with Jews, and more than half a daily interaction. When we ask about the feeling of acceptance by the Israeli society, 1/3 said that they do feel that they're accepted, and 1/3 they say they're not. So they do have their interaction. As a minority, obviously, you know the majority better than the majority knows the minority, but still, 1/3. Another topic that we asked about was, how do you feel about religious symbols? So 1/3 of Jewish Israelis said that they are not bothered when they see Christian wearing a cross. 2/3, sorry. That means that 1/3 do feel bothered. And younger people, in all the questions, have more negative attitudes than the older people. So younger generation is less tolerant than the older generation. And then when we ask Palestinian Christian if they feel comfortable to wear Christian symbols, and then we got 1 of 5 said that they feel uncomfortable to wear a cross, and especially in Jerusalem, the percentage were double. So people don't feel comfortable. Some people don't feel comfortable to wear a cross. Again, think about it in different contexts. How would that be accepted if, when Jews don't feel comfortable to wear Jewish symbols? Again, younger people in East Jerusalem, 42%. So we have a problem here. And one of the things we tried to do in the Rossing Center when it was established back then 20 years ago when I started to work there is trying to analyze. First, by defining who are the Christian. So when we talk about Christians in the Holy Land, we're talking about less than 2% of the population. That means about 185,000 people out of the 10 million citizens of Israel. Most of them are, 80% of them are Arab speakers and 20% non-Arab speakers, so not Arab. They belong to 13 official denominations. Sounds very few, but we're talking about the traditional churches mainly. These churches were recognized by the Ottoman, that means the 19th century. So if you establish a new church, maybe you exist as a community, but not exist according to the state, because you don't have an official status. But anyway, this small community of 185,000 are divided between 13 and many more other communities that are not recognized. As I said, most of them indigenous Arab-speaking Christians. It's a small minority. There are also non-Arab Christians who live and more integrated into the Jewish society, like asylum seekers and migrant workers who work with Jewish families. And most of the Arab Christians, Palestinian Christians, live in Arab towns and villages. Again, people or most Christians live in places that have a long history. They're connected to the land and to the area, to the region where the family was living there for centuries. And there are few mixed cities where you do have Arab and Jews living together, Palestinian and Jews living together, and also a small minority of Christians. For example, in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is a mixed city, 1/3 of the city Palestinians, 2/3 Jewish, and among the 1 million people who live in Jerusalem, there are about 13,000 Christians. So this is an example for a mixed city. Haifa, Jaffa, these are cities where you have also Christian Arabs living together with Jews. But most of the Christians live in villages or towns that are only Arab Palestinians, so Nazareth and villages around the Galilee. The Christian institutions serve not only the Christian, but still in Israel, Palestine, many of the community services are given by the church. School, even if they follow the Israeli curriculum, supervised by the Ministry of Education, but the schools belong to the church, and most of the students are Muslim, and of course the Christians. All of them go to Christian school, to church schools, hospitals, social services, all of these are given by the church. So the church is not just a place where you go to pray on Sunday, but it's a very important institution that serves the community. Few things about the Jewish community in Israel, different kind of data. So 75%, almost 75% of Israelis are Jewish. And then we usually divide ourselves not according to denomination, but according to the level of religiosity. And religiosity is not measured by your relationship with God, but to what extent you observe the Jewish law. So if you address someone and ask, are you religious? Which is a very common question to ask in Israel, and it's not too sensitive and too personal. Actually, I don't have to ask in many cases. I can look at the person and see how religious he is by the way he is dressed. But so we usually divide the groups based on praxis, and these are the numbers are really depend on the question. How do you ask the question? But 42% consider themselves secular. It doesn't mean that they are secular. The percentage of people who define themselves as atheist is maybe 5%. So a lot of people, secular doesn't mean that they're atheists. It means that they don't practice. They would drive on Shabbat. They may be not really strict with kosher, but maybe they would keep some things. They would sometimes go to synagogue, so do certain things, but definitely connected to the Jewish heritage. Traditional, the same, but a little bit more religious, practice a bit more. Religious people, these are people who identify themselves as practicing all the Jewish laws, and there are different levels of practicing. So there are the ultra-Orthodox who said that they're practicing even more, I mean, strict practice of the Jewish law. They have less interaction with the general society. So for example, ultra-Orthodox would rarely go to university and get higher education, and due to challenges we have with that connected to the army service, many of them just study the Jewish text until they get to the age of 30-something. So only religious studies. In latest surveys, not connected to the election, but just about attitudes related to the political situation, and maybe it's important to mention when we talk about right and left in Israeli politics, it's mainly related to the security situation and attitudes toward the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is not related to economy or social issues. So 66 identify as right-wing and 12% as left-wing. That means that more focus on solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and taking care of minority rights, while right-wing would be more focusing on prioritizing security and religion and national concerns more than general concerns about the society. So now what are the special challenges? I think by now you understand that we have many challenges regarding Jewish-Christian relations, and maybe what we try to do when the organization was established is maybe to kind of make a list of what are the special challenges, the unique challenges of Jewish-Christian relations in Israel, and in what way they're different from relationship in other parts of the world. So starting by the question is, who's the minority and who's the majority? The power dynamics, because this has a lot of impact on their relationship. When you participate in a dialogue program here in the US, Jews and Christians, it's kind of obvious who's the majority and who's the minority. Maybe you are, as a Christian, a minority in other contexts, but in the Jewish-Christian dialogue, the Jews are the minority, the Christian the majority. In Israel, it's not clear who is the minority and who is the majority. Now, you might think, obviously, you just said that 75% of Israelis are Jews, so isn't it obvious that the Jews are the majority? No, because being a majority or minority is a self-perception. It's not an objective question. How do you consider yourself? How do you see yourself? How do you perceive your status? And since we came from, we know how to be minority, we have done that for 2,000 years, we still do that around the world. Even in Israel, we still have the mentality of minority, overprotective, closed, feel that all the world is against us. Definitely, the Christians in the Holy Land, they are part of double majority. They're part of the Christian world. All the Christians in the world are there to protect them, and we are the small minority of Jews. And they're part of the Arab world. All the Arab countries protecting them and supporting them. So we are still the minority, and the Christians, they are the majority. While the Christians wonder, what are you talking about? We are double minority. We are minority within a minority. We are Christians in an Arab-Muslim society, and we're a minority of Arabs within a Jewish state, with a Jewish majority. So when it's not clear who is the minority and who is the majority, it's really hard to get to a dialogue, because each side expects the other to sympathize, to listen, to take responsibility. And it's something that sometimes it's really hard to understand, how the objective numbers do not fit the self-perception of how you see yourself. So that's one thing to put on the table and realize how difficult it is. The second thing is the historical legacy that we brought with us. We Israeli Jews came to Israel, many of us after the Second World War, with history of Jewish-Christian animosity. Now, there are many changes, tremendous changes in the Christian world, mainly in the Western Christian world, regarding their attitude toward Jews. We're celebrating this month the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, a Catholic document that changed the attitude, or worked on changing the, started a process of changing the attitude of the church, the Catholic Church, toward Jews. Protestant churches around the world made huge changes much earlier, but this memory is still there. And the Jewish community, definitely in Israel, hasn't started a process of healing their relationship with the Christian world. And as we said, we have little interaction with Christians. So if the only thing you know about Christians is either, again, the television, American television, and history textbook. And what do you get in history textbook? Just a highlight of Jewish history. And the highlights of Jewish history is pogrom, persecution, and the Shoah. Why would you change your perception of Christian and Christianity if that's the only thing you know? So for a lot of Israelis, not all of them, but a lot of Israelis, that's what they see that's what they think about when they see a cross. It's not just a symbol of faith, but it's a symbol of history of Jewish-Christian relations, and the trauma, talking about traumas, that we inherited, or I inherited from my parents, and we pass it on to the next generation. Again, as I said, trauma not necessarily something I personally experienced. It's a trauma that we carry from one generation to the other. And we haven't started to deal with that, to solve the trauma. Now, when we come to meet with local Christians, they wonder, what do you want from us? This is your trauma with a European Christian. Why we have to hear about your problem with Christian in Europe when we ourselves, we were here a minority for so many years. We have nothing to do with what you experience in Europe. Again, we need to talk about the trauma, and we need both sides to be able to listen to the trauma of the other and not to compete who suffered more. There's no competition over pain. Just be able to listen, because this is part of the relationship. So being aware of that. Again, when we talk about interfaith in Europe, it needless to say that we carry the trauma of the Shoah, but in the Holy Land, it needs to be said because it's part of the dialogue. And of course, mutually recognizing traumas that we both had. The theological challenges. I mentioned that, although it's kind of obvious, there are theological differences between Judaism and Christianity, between Jews and Christian, and that's something that here you also discuss. But when we talk about Jewish-Muslim dialogue, for example, because a lot of people kind of wonder, why do you have a separate organization for Jewish-Christian dialogue? Why not to have Jewish-Christian-Muslim? So of course, we include Muslim in the dialogue, but we also emphasize on Jewish-Christian because there are less theological challenges when it comes to Jewish-Muslim dialogue. And their special theological challenges come from the roots of both religion that need to be tackled. So the theological challenges are there from the Jewish side. From the Christian side, maybe I should give the theologian in the room to say something about it, but I would say for him that for Christians, there are their own theological challenges of reading the Bible in the land of the Bible. You can read about the people of Israel. You can read about the promised land. You can put it in context, but it's a theoretical question. But for a Palestinian Christian to read about the promised land, about the chosen people, and to think, oh, the chosen people? Is that the soldier in the checkpoint? Talking about the Jewishness of Jesus, which is kind of obvious, it's biblical, but just to say that, for a Palestinian Christian to say, Jesus was a Jew, it's hard, because the Jew is the soldier in the checkpoint, it's the politician, it's the occupier, so it's a sentence that it's hard for Palestinian Christian to say. It's a sentence that is very, and at the same way, it's hard for Israeli Jews to understand why Christians say that Jesus was Palestinian. What does it mean to him? Why do they say that? Why they deny the Jewishness of Jesus? So just to have a conversation about it, very different in the context of the Holy Land. Language, very basic thing. In what language do we talk? Is it Hebrew? Then it wouldn't be the mother tongue of the Palestinian. Is it Arabic? Well, my Arabic is very limited. English? Well, it's not my mother tongue, so it's very hard for me to express myself in English. I know it doesn't sound like that, but when it comes to really sensitive things, I forget all the words. And then the conflict. As we said, you cannot have a Jewish-Christian dialogue without talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's not Jewish-Christian, it's Israeli-Jewish, Christian-Palestinian. It's always connected to the political situation. I cannot just take the text from the Bible and try to read it together without talking about the context of the conflict that we are living in. We cannot just have a dialogue about faith, about traditions. We have to talk about the conflict. As we cannot ignore the religious aspect of the dialogue when we have Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, we cannot ignore the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the national conflict, when we have Jewish-Christian dialogue. So knowing and being aware of the challenges is very important. And then what happened after October 7th? Yeah, if anyone has a question, please pass it on to Rabbi Nancy. So that's what we're doing for the last 20 years. And it's not easy, and there are many challenges, all of them that were mentioned, and there's curiosity, there's interest, but also a lot of prejudice that we have to deal with, and traumas. But then came the 7th of October and the war in Gaza. And it took us a long time to, not so long, but it took us some time to get together as a staff, as we mix staff, as John mentioned, Jews, Christian, Muslims, Israelis, Palestinians, just to be able to talk together and think, how do we continue? How do we adjust our programs? And of course, also Jewish-Christian programs and things that related to Jewish-Christian relations. One of the questions we asked in the survey a month ago, we asked people if they felt that there's a change in Jewish-Christian relations after October 7th. So 1/4 said that they thought that there was a change for worse, and about 1/3 said that there was no change, and about 1/5 said that there's a change for better. So definitely 1/4 of the people felt, and then you have 1/4 that just don't know. So don't know could mean that they don't know or they don't care. But 1/4 of people felt that there was, that things got worse since the beginning of the war. So even if you get the impression that there's a lot of support and a lot of churches support Israel, and we get to the other question, Zionist Christians support Israel, and there's very little, and so the feeling is that something happened in this relationship between Jews and Christians, and it got worse. And then we ask about evangelical Christian. So when we say evangelical Christian, it's not just general evangelical Christian. In Israeli mindset, it's evangelical Christian who are Zionists, who are supportive of Israel. They're not aware of that diversity within the evangelical world. So even there you have about 1/5 that said that there's a change for worse, but then a bit more than 1/4 believe that there's a change for better, so the support got better. So, so what, oh, yeah. One more. So there's a very clear, there's a feeling that things got worse with all the Christian world, with the Catholic Church, even with evangelical Christians. And the question is, what do we do to repair? And we, in our programs, and we have educational programs, we have dialogue programs, so getting people together to talk. We have lectures and all kind of educational activities. We try to focus on a couple of things. First of all, we talk about hope as an act of resistance. Not to lose hope. Hope, it's not, we don't have this privilege of losing hope. I say that to ourselves, but I also say that to you. And to come to the dialogue from a faith-based approach. So for many people, if you use the text, if you use the religious values and not abuse religious values, and use it in a way that would help you to build the relationship, it's very important. Not everyone can necessarily relate to the text, but people are moved when you use the text, when you speak the words of the text, of the scriptures. So using them and talk about faith and tradition. Now, it doesn't have to be very religious. Again, it could be culturally connected to the text and to the tradition, because not all the people are very, very religious, but giving space for that. And then using the tools that we developed in the Rustling Center, and we use also in the interfaith dialogue, when you listen to the other, to have mindful listening, being aware that you're not judging the person while you're listening to him. Be aware that you don't try to justify yourself in your mind when you listen to him. Try not to examine while you're listening. Is it true what he said, or it's incorrect and he's saying something which is not correct? That's what we do when we listen to the other, but we try to demand the participant to be mindful of their listening, to be mindful of how they listen to the other, which is fine. Of course, it's very natural to do that, but just be aware of that. Talking about emotions. It's not a dialogue of knowledge. I'm not gonna explain you what's the right way to read the text, or what is the right Judaism, or that's what Jesus meant. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about how do we feel about it. So paying a lot of attention to that. Creating a safe space to dialogue. Not everyone is comfortable to share. They don't know what's gonna come out of the discussion. If you would go and say something to someone outside the room, how do we create a space when I feel comfortable enough and safe enough to share and to explain and to express myself? And what we also try to do is that the outcome would be openness, empathy, compassion to each other, not necessarily accepting the opinions. And definitely if we're talking about interfaith relation, we're not there to convert or to change anyone's opinion or faith, but to have empathy and openness toward each other, so we would be able to feel closer. And the next step would be to share our lives. Again, not just to share information about holidays, but to understand that we are in the same region, both communities, all communities, Israelis and Palestinians, and we have to find a way to be there together. So we use these tools.
So we'll move now to Q&A.
So that's a bit of what we do in our programs. We would like to open the floor for questions and thoughts, and and maybe expand the conversation.
Well, thank you. There we go. All right, so what accounts for the higher levels of conservatism or intolerance or racism in younger Israelis? Is the same true for younger Palestinians?
I'm not sure statistically about Palestinians, but
with the survey I just saw this morning, it's true.
Sure. But amongst at least Israelis, I can't speak as an Israeli Jew, but I do think that it's connected to, as we mentioned, trauma, tapping into sort of collective trauma. B, I think also as the sort of conflict has continued, a lot of, again, in the mind of an Israeli, they perceive it as Israel has tried to sort of make peace, but Palestinians just retaliate, and therefore I think that's also kind of fed into that sort of narrative. And yeah, I guess also the footage that's been circling with October 7th has also made that more clear. And finally, the right-wing parties have really taken over the education system, and that has furthered that type of hatred.
I would say it's a phenomenon that we see in many parts of the world. Young generation is less exposed to people who are different, to diversity. Young generation were born after the Second Intifada. They were born with a wall between Israel and the West Bank. They were born to a reality where you can meet Palestinian Christian in very few places, and they have less opportunity for interaction. And the young generation gets most of its knowledge about the other from the social media. And I feel very old when I say that, but the social media has a horrible impact. You get only the bad and violent videos, again, not even Facebook, but TikTok and things like that. The videos that get attention are the more aggressive, the one that's full of hatred. So then that's the information you're fed with. And the right-wing, populist, racist leaders, parties, suggest something that unfortunately we, the liberal, open-minded, pluralistic people, do not offer answers. We just say, well, you have to be more liberal, but they give them something to hang on. So that's why young people have less knowledge, less exposure to positive things and more exposure to negative things, and they have answers and figures that help them to organize the world between bad and good. And I was just looking at a new survey that was published just this month, in the end of September. They just published it today, that also in the Palestinian society in the West Bank, the younger generation is more negative and more pessimist and has more negative attitude toward Israel and Israelis. So I think it's common, unfortunately. So thinking about the future, we have to work fast.
So maybe this is a follow-up on that. The question is, whom do young Israelis view as the enemy? And there are so many choices, so it would be, is it the Christians? Is it Muslims? Is it the Arabs? Is it Palestinians? Right?
Is it all of the above?
And is it all of the above? All right, so is there one dominant way that young Israelis look at who their enemy is in the Holy Land? And then I want to add my own twist to that and ask the question, so what about young Palestinians? Do they make a distinction between the Israeli government and its policies and the right wing and Jews per se? Or are they all lumped together in the mind of Palestinian youth?
Maybe I'll start with the Israelis. It really depends, but I think as more involved we are with the war in Gaza, and the world became more critical, so the enemy was expanded for the Israeli young generation. It was, after the 7th of October, it was Hamas, and then all the Palestinians in Gaza. And then if you a Palestinian in Israel and you show sympathy to the Palestinian in Gaza, so you were included. And then all the Arabs, you saw the statistics, 76% of Israeli Jews think that there are no innocent people in Gaza. So obviously there's kind of generalization that is being done. And when the criticism from, when anti-Semitic there were protests in Europe and in America, and anti-Semitic incidents where it's really hard to differentiate, and sometimes the line is not clear between anti-Semitism and criticism, and many of us in Israel have tendency to interpret every criticism as anti-Semitism. So it's also the whole world and all the Christians. So it really depends, but as more vulnerable and more and less confident you are, the wider the enemy is.
I say for Palestinian, it depends. Some Palestinians, I mean, the majority would obviously, the other enemy would be Israelis. Some would obviously extend that to the West, and specifically the US, since it funds the military in Israel, and therefore they see it as complicit in the genocide. And then others would see also some Muslim factions as sort of an enemy also to what the Palestinians are trying to achieve. So it depends which Palestinian you'd be asking.
Let me expand the question a little bit for you, John, too, and say, for Jews, there is not really maybe one definition of being a Zionist, right? There are numerous, but there are nonetheless, at least a common sense about all those definitions that would say that there's a right for Jews to live in Palestine, in the Holy Land. But is there nuance in the thinking of Palestinians about the language of Zionism when it comes to Jews? Or are Palestinians, when they use the language of Zionists, always seeing that as people who should not be there, who are invading our land and that sort of thing?
Again, it depends who you ask amongst Palestinians, but I think a general Palestinian perspective is, it's not exactly how you presented it. It's, some would see Zionism as not just sort of this idea of having a connection to the land, but actually as a political movement.
Mm-hmm.
So the critique would be towards a political movement who has used settler colonial means. That would be the critique. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want the Jews to be there. Mm-hmm. It's just that they're critical of that specific political movement, if that makes sense.
All right. Good. Thank you. Is there any possibility of improving Jewish-Christian relations given the trauma of the Arab-Israeli conflict? Obviously, this is what you do, right? So we would hope that you would think that. But I think much of the evening has been addressing that, but it's been harder because of...
It is hard, but one of the things, since my work is mainly educational work and I teach Israeli Jews about Christian and Christianity, and maybe I should clarify, because the next question would be, why not a Christian teaching Israeli Jews about Christian Christianity? So we realized that, first of all, you have to know enough Judaism and the Jewish Israeli mentality in order to explain Christianity, because if you're Christian and you're not familiar with that, you don't understand what they don't understand. You don't understand the language to explain them. But also, there's always a fear. I remember a student of mine who after we brought as a guest speaker a Christian to speak in the course, she came to me and said, "You sure he was not trying to evangelize? Because he was smiling all the time." So you understand to what extent this trauma we still carry. That's what I do. I try to educate and teach, and I do see a lot of curiosity. We see that. We see interest. I also see how difficult it is for people to give up their prejudice about Christianity and this trauma that we carry from Europe when they come to talk about Christianity. We also see other negative phenomena that we're working on when there's an increase of incidents of harassment to Christians, especially in Jerusalem. It's a very difficult city, lots of very religious people, very conservative. So we have incidents of Jews, religious Jews, who spit or verbally harass Christians or vandalize property, make graffiti. We try to track these incidents. We publish an annual report. Here, this is a hard copy, but you can get the online copy from our website, where we try to analyze why the phenomena happens. And when we ask in the survey, what do you think about this phenomena? The number of people who said that they actually support that is 4%. All of them ultra-Orthodox and religious Jews. But most of Israelis, huge percentage of them, said that they see it as a very severe thing. 55% said that it's a severe phenomena that these people should be punished. So it's kind of both. There's interest, there's curiosity, there's fear, there's tensions, and as I said, hope is an act of resistance. I'm not ready to give up hope, and we continue to educate, we continue to bring people together, we continue to explain. We'll see the results, but we don't give up the hope.
In many ways, the conflict is deeply connected to Jewish-Christian relations, right? Some of its origins. So in some ways, in order to find a better reality for all communities living in Israel-Palestine is we need to work on that Jewish-Christian component. And I fear that both Jewish-Christian relations here in the US and Jewish-Christian relations back home are not going to change if there's not drastic change in the framing of our relationships. Because we're trying to build a movement from within, and that's a lot of interpersonal and institutional change. But we need to change also structures and systems that are continuing to perpetrate unhealthy relationships, whether that be by Christians in the far right here that are blatantly anti-Semitic, or on the sort of more progressive side who still objectify Jews as well. So I think we need to completely change the reality in order for us to actually move forward.
So I think you addressed some of these questions already in terms of the biggest challenges you face in the current environment and the like. How do you invite people into a dialogue and get them to continue it? How does your program of peace education overcome falsehoods and distortions that young people hear at home from their friends and schools and through social media?
We're working under a fascist government at the moment, so civil society space is shrinking. And therefore we have lots of obstacles at the moment.
Were you talking about there or here?
They seem to mirror one another. And at the moment we're in a struggle with the municipality who's refusing to give us our tax exemption as a non-profit organization. And there's more stories. The way we try to engage with institutions and individuals is, A, we're very careful in some of our messaging. So you always have to be strategic how you present yourself, especially if you're trying to work with the Ministry of Education. That's one thing. The second thing is we do offer tools that I think are helpful for anyone in any context. But then, so for instance, for our teacher program, we say that we help them with managing conflictual conversations in the classroom, which is true. But then we include a lot of curriculum that is Israel-Palestine focused. And lastly, we also offer carrots. So, whether that be credit for university students or scholarship for universities students as well, or, to get principals on board, we offer a trip abroad. So we try and find different strategic ways to get people in the room who wouldn't be there just because they feel like promoting peace and justice.
And I would say that after October 7th, we also realized that there are people who came to us and asked for help, especially in universities, since campuses are mixed. And in Hebrew University, about 15% are Palestinian Christian from East Jerusalem and from the north. And they, in October 23, there was supposed to be the fall semester supposed to start. Of course, it started 2 months later, and the people, the staff in the campus thought, how can we open the doors, the gates of the campus when we have East Jerusalemite, Palestinian, and Jews studying together? We have to address that. So they came to us and asked for help, how to deal with that. There's a college in Jerusalem for engineering, and they thought, fine, it's not our problem. I mean, our students don't talk about politics. Our students don't talk about history. They do science, they do engineering. But they realized it's not so simple. And in the middle of the year, they called us and said, can you provide something? Just toward the end of the year, one of the professors talked to our colleagues and said, we've noticed that after the workshop, there was more collaboration between the Arab and the Jewish students in the university. So we start to see that there is a need for that. And in some places, they're brave enough to say, well, we need help to deal with that. And that's where we come into that.
So I want to switch a little bit. We've been talking mostly about dealing with trauma and about Jewish and Christian relations and about the conflicts that have been interreligious and personal and all of that. But I think everyone here is eager to know your thoughts about the future of the Holy Land. We have a ceasefire. We have a promised peace plan of some sort. But up until now, we only have really heard much about the concept of a two-state solution. And yet, I think many of us know that there are some people who've given up on that and wouldn't know exactly how a one-state solution would look. There's also this Swiss idea of the cantons and things of that nature that we haven't really explored in our imagination beyond some of these traditional ways of looking at it. And I think, John, it's interesting that though Christians are only 2% of the population, even less and less, there are some actual Palestinian Christians who are very important in this conversation about the future of Palestinian self-determination and autonomy. So what are you hearing in the imagination of Palestinians? What do you think, Hana, is in the mind of Israelis about what is possible? One land, two peoples. How will this work? Is there a coalescing hope that you see that people are beginning to envision?
I'd say that this is not the time to talk about solutions, in the sense that what we've seen in Gaza is, there's no words for it. So I think solutions is jumping ahead, and first we have to work on the desire. And in order to work on the desire to truly want a just and peace reality for Palestinians and Israelis, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, the imbalance of power has to change. And the imbalance of power is so wide at the moment that there's no way that with the current Israeli leadership are they going to ever really try and reach any form of solution that is good for both Israelis and Palestinians. And that's why, in some ways, they have to be pressured to do so. The problem is that the main power that is allowing this to happen is the U.S. And the people who are running the U.S., as they're messing things internally here, I don't think are responsible and capable enough to think ahead for a better reality.
I agree that it's not time for solutions. We first have to stabilize the situation now in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and for the Palestinians within the State of Israel. Unfortunately, the Israeli society still lives the 7th of October, not even the 8th of October. We're still in the 7th of October. Very little exposure to what's happening in Gaza. Very little ability to recognize what we've caused, and therefore, the very little I will not include that. Means they have very little hope for peace or solution, which is not connected to violence and war. I think that would be changed after a while, but. Now it's, again, we're still, as long as we stick to the 7th of October and don't move forward, then we'll not hear other things. But we try to build peace. We try to promote values of justice and equality. And it would integrate into any solution that would come in the future. We're helping to build a foundation, so whenever there will be any kind of solution, these values would be strong enough and rooted enough so that that the society would follow in the line of these values.
John, you mentioned a metaphor this afternoon when we were talking about Holy Saturday and the importance of, in the Christian tradition, not rushing from Good Friday to Easter, but sitting in the grief and whatnot. Would you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, a lot of Christians that I meet abroad or that come to the Holy Land are, they hear about our stories as Palestinians, and then straight away they're like, what gives you hope? Aren't you hopeful? And this question kind of annoys us, which I usually answer and say that the hope that you're seeking is this weird optimism that I think is unhealthy. And what we strive for, at least as a Palestinian Christian, is this sort of hope that is in between Friday and Sunday, crucifixion and resurrection. It's this space in Holy Saturday that one could describe as deep trauma. And if we don't sit in that space, we can sort of gloss over suffering and pain and quickly jump to this Sunday of resurrection. And that's why I've been trying to invite some Christians. I cannot speak to my Jewish brothers and sisters, but at least for the Christians to sit in that space of grief and lament.
Which is probably an important cautionary word to those of us who maybe are excited in America about the idea that we could just solve this thing quickly. Now we have a 20-point peace plan, and we're going to get the Arab countries together, and we're going to have a U.S. investment, and this thing is going to be settled finally, you know. And this is a rushing to Sunday, so to speak. It's a failure to recognize how healing really takes place.
And I think when we ask about hope, I always hear the person who asked the question looking for the hope within himself. I don't have to tell myself that I have hope. By the fact that I'm living in Jerusalem, that I'm raising my son who's sitting outside and playing computer, I have hope. And if I'm asked about it, I usually recommend the person who asks to say, well, you're looking for that hope. You want to hang on to my hope, but there's no need for that. I think we all live in troubling realities, different kind of troubles, and we have to look for the hope within ourselves. And as we do that in our own context, I think each and every one of us have to do it in their own context.
And I'll just say that I use Mary Magdalene as a model to follow for sort of that space of trauma. So when all the male disciples disappeared, you had Mary Magdalene who was still going to anoint the body. She was still doing the right thing amidst the trauma, not knowing that resurrection is coming. And that's sort of a model, I think, for us, is to continue doing the right thing, even if we don't know what the immediate result is going to be.
And perhaps women could lead us a little more. Is it okay?
Well,
There's
there's
that.
another issue in our context, which is very patriarchal context in the Middle East, Jews, Christian, and Muslim, to find a way to include the women, needless to say, in politics, but also in religious communities, and generally in the society. There's a long way to go in that sense as well.
Very quickly, it would be helpful, I think, to people here. One of the questions was addressing this power imbalance. But if you could break down the percentages of, you know, who are the people in the Holy Land? And, you know, so, for example, you know, in Israel, what is the percentage of Jews and Arabs, say, for instance, and among the Palestinians, Christians, and Muslims, say? So
I just said numbers, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about how the numbers are not really the issue, but it's more than that. So 73% of Israelis, citizens of Israel and residents of East Jerusalem are Jewish. Not connected to their religiosity or relationship with God, but it's the way they're registered by the state. In Israel, we don't have separation of state and religion. That's why I can give you the exact number of people who are registered as Jews, Christian, and Muslim. So you're registered according to your religion, and 73% registered as Jews. That means that they have a Jewish mother. Then about 18% registered as Arab Muslims, and less than 2% as Christian. Among them, 145,000 Arab Christians, Arab-speaking Christians, and then another 40,000 as Christians who are not Arabs, Armenians or married to Jews or other reasons. And then we have in Israel about 5% of the people who are registered with no religion. That means that the state do not recognize their religious affiliation, either because they came due to the law of return, because they have a Jewish parent but not a Jewish mother, so the state does not register them as Jews, but they're usually integrated into the Jewish Israeli society. So it's actually 80% who are Israeli, Hebrew speakers. So these are the numbers, but I think it's not the numbers, it's beyond that. The power dynamics are not connected to the number of Arabs, Palestinians in Israel, but it's something that's related to the history and to the tensions, and maybe John wants to say
and the structures of and power. I guess the best way is for me to, when I speak to Americans, is think about sort of the relationship with the African American, or the history of black people in this country, or the Native American, and those types of systems of structures. That it's not necessarily about the percentage of people, but the systems and structures.
So you described earlier how in Israel and the Holy Land generally, when you say someone is religious, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're practicing, observant, have a relationship to God and the like. But as you do your work, do you find that people who do have a faith that they practice and who draw upon religious texts in their lives, can this be an access point for creating an ethical bridge that would lead forward? Because how we read our religious texts, how we read Scripture, can either divide us or unify us, right? And that's true in each of our religions, but among our religions also. Is that a thing that you explore, a direction that is helpful?
I think it's quite different in the Jewish context and the Christian context, and the Muslim context that I will not definitely talk about it because I don't know enough and not involved enough. Unfortunately, in the Jewish context in Israel today, the religious Jewish society practicing using the text in a negative, in a way, I will not say it's abusing the text, because everyone has the right to use the text as they want, but finding the text that would emphasize on Jewish supremacy, on hatred, on putting security, prioritize security of your community over minority rights, and so it's, I would say they use the text and they come out with something which is totally the opposite of the values I believe in. There's a small movement that used the title "The Faithful Left." These are religious people who insist on these values of justice and peace and equality, using the scriptures, using the Jewish traditional values, but it's a minority, unfortunately, and and I would say on a very personal level, when I was considering or struggling if I should go to the synagogue nearby in my neighborhood for the high holidays. High holidays, these are holidays about repentance, asking for forgiveness, and I felt, well, I cannot stand with the people there, because I assume that many of them, when they think about forgiveness, they think about repentance. They don't see what's happening in Gaza. They don't take responsibility on what we're doing to the Palestinians. And I was generalizing because I felt that that's the attitude of the religious community. I also want to say that I interviewed a friend who's a Catholic priest for the Hebrew-speaking Catholic community. It's a small community in Israel of Catholics who speak and pray in Hebrew, about 700 if I want to exaggerate. Actually, those who are familiar with the Catholic Church in the Holy Land, the Cardinal, who's the head Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, was in the past praying in that community because he also speaks Hebrew. He studied in Hebrew University. But anyway, I was interviewing the vicar for that community, and he said, in the beginning, after the 7th of October, many of the parishioners, some have Jewish background, some just integrated into the Hebrew-speaking Jewish community. The atmosphere was an atmosphere of revenge. We couldn't say anything about Palestinians. We couldn't talk about the war. They just, they have their children in the army. They they were very full of hate. But then slowly, he said, we went back to our roots, to our values. Slowly, we started to talk about love and about compassion. And then there was a division within the church between those who were loyal to the Catholic values and those who were loyal to the political views. And I thought, wow, it's totally the opposite of what I experienced in many of the synagogues in Israel. Again, it's very different from the context here, because in our synagogue, as more religious you are, it seems like the more nationalist you would be, and if you're not nationalist, you consider, oh, you're not serious, you're not rely on the Jewish values. So again, you can take the text to whatever you want, but unfortunately, I think in Israel you find a phenomenon very clear that most of the religious Jews take a very right-wing stand when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
I'd quickly say that I don't think we've lost sort of our ability to use hermeneutical tools to deal with the scripture, but we've lost our basic humanity. And I think perhaps the hermeneutics that we need is a hermeneutics of humility in how we do things. And sometimes it's not so much how, with which tool I engage in Scripture, but with who I engage with Scripture. And I think this is where we can be very helpful for, shining light on where we have blind spots.
So during the civil rights era in the U.S., the Black Americans drew heavily upon the story of the Exodus. And it was very formative in their understanding of the nature of their Christian movement as a liberation movement, right, of freedom. And this is something, John, I know that especially young Christian Palestinians are fairly broadly committed to, a kind of understanding of the Christian faith as a liberation faith. Could you share that with, so for those who think of Christianity as being, supportive of empire, traditionally, the Crusades and the, defending itself against enemies and the like, what is this understanding of Christianity that has taken root in Palestinian imagination?
So amongst certain Palestinian Christians, we see ourselves as sort of a continuation of the early church, beginning with Pentecost, and that since then we've just seen empire over empire over empire control the land, right? And therefore for us to see, for instance, a country like America that's so Christian and uses Christian language for empire is very foreign to us. It's weird, to say the least. And there's a tradition amongst these theologians where they're trying to engage in liberative forms of Christianity and drawing it from their communities and theology. So there's a new edited book called The Cross and the Olive Tree, which I co-edited, which has 8 Palestinian theologians engaging on these subjects.
And it's just out, and you can get it on Amazon. It's called The Cross and the Olive Tree. Yes.
So I think we as Palestinian Christians, can sometimes help Christians who maybe belong to stronger powers to help them, deconstruct their Christianity from empire, but also to help. I was speaking to a bunch of American Christians, and I told them, you keep reading the gospel as if you're the disciples, but you should be reading it as if you're the Romans.
Whoa.
And it's like trying to, I think there's a lot of cross, pollination that can help, I hope, some Christian nationalists or general American Christians who have this deep sense of exceptionalism and, the city on the hilltop and
right.
spreading democracy everywhere.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of work within the Christian churches here.
Well, and even in this model of liberation, there's a lot of fear that this is revolutionary and that, it's just creating enemies with the oppressed. And, Robert Frost had a poem where he talked about what we need is a revolution by half because, otherwise you just keep in this doom loop of who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed. But the oppressor needs liberation as well. And that's where religion really can be at work and do its work. So the goal is not who defeats whom, but how do we live together in this radical humanity of respect and dignity. And so thank you so very much for being with us, and all of you for these wonderful questions. Obviously, I'm sure that as you sat here tonight, you probably heard all of this about Israel and Palestine and what they're going through, but there was probably an awful lot going on in your own mind about the context in which we live today with one another in our country. And we pray that this has been a mirror that's been held up to us, and that we can pray for you and you can pray for us, and that we will all be at work in this work of building peace.
I'll just quickly, thank you so much. I'll just quickly say that we have 3 calls for you, and you can take any one of them or none of them, but I hope you do take at least one. Is one, join a form of initiative that is trying to promote genuine peace and justice in Israel and Palestine, and you can do that through a variety of ways. There's lots of organizations, even initiatives here, that are doing good work, so please be involved in that. The second thing is join, if you want, the Rossing Center's community. We have a newsletter. We have once a month a webinar in English engaging in these topics. And finally, if you have the means, also consider donating to us, and you can use the QR code for that. Thank you for listening.
And thank you again to Northway for having us, and feel free to remain and have conversation if you'd like. Please go to faithcommons.org and see other events coming up. There is plenty that we're up to, and we'd love to invite you to participate with us as well. Thank you and good evening.